Hello, hello, hello. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to You've Championed Yourself. Who are you? I'm your host, Chris Ferguson, and it has been a dream of mine to showcase people who've taken their dreams or ideas and turned it into their reality. As many people know, it's hard to walk beyond your struggles, your pains, and your traumas, and so many people give up. They lose hope. There are a few who can walk through their obstacles and challenges. They don't know where it's taking them. They don't know where they're going to. They just trust themselves enough not to give up and do the follow through in their personal life, their career, and in relationships. These are the people I call everyday champions. Today, I have an amazing, amazing individual with me today. His name's Kevin McNee. He has a very diverse background. My father was in his field, but in the US and not Canada. So I have some understanding of that. So let's bring Kevin in and let's find out who Kevin is. Hi, young man. How are you?
I'm doing really good. And you know what? It's knowing your story and your background, Chris, it's an honor for me just to be a part of this and being here with you. So thank you for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's just that, after 40 years in law enforcement and you see all the crap that people do to other people, it was my dream to honor the everyday person who doesn't celebrate themselves because they don't acknowledge what they're doing. They don't acknowledge their successes. And it's like, wow, you know what? I had some issues going on and I got beyond them. And you know what? I should be proud of that. But we always second guess ourselves.
Totally.
So with that, can we talk about how you were a people pleaser?
Of course. Yeah, that was, I call myself a reformed people pleaser now, but, it's still something that I will catch myself in moments where I get stuck in that old mentality of like, how can I make this situation better for somebody else and avoid conflict or confrontation? It was, it was a fear. And, you hear about the fight, flight, or freeze response. And mine was always freeze and being the peacekeeper, people pleaser at all costs to try and make sure that one, I could avoid conflict, and two, everybody still liked me at the end of it. Right. Playing both sides of the fence and not really taking a side, so to speak, or really, speaking in my own truth.
Yeah. It's easy to be non-committed. It is very easy. And then when you go home, you're like, well, that's not who I am.
Yeah.
So totally. How did you become authentic in your truth?
It took a long time. It didn't happen. I lived 39 years before I could actually speak my truth and really knew who I was and being authentic. And realistically, I had to like, put myself right into the fire. And with that was, I was in a long-term relationship. I was with my ex-wife for 12 years total, just over 12 years total, but married for 9. And in that, I lost myself and didn't really have an identity. Everything that I did was to try and make sure that our relationship was good, so to speak. But there was really no such thing. It was just, some days were better than others. And it felt like I tried so hard to please, right? I heard a saying a while ago. It was actually from my dad, and he's like, son, it's happy wife, happy life. And if you live by that, then, your marriage will be happy. And I was like, well, how do I make her happy? Because everything that I do just, there's just more tacked onto the list. I took pride in the fact that I was home every night. I took care of the kids. I bathed them. I read them stories and put them to bed every night. I provided. I worked hard, so hard that I gave my way to my job. But then when I came home, I gave myself to my ex-wife, and but I did take pride in the fact that I helped around the house. I mowed the lawns. I cleaned the bathrooms. I did the windows. I did the dishes. I cooked dinner, some of the time. I'm not going to say all the time, but I took pride in that. And when I was doing all those things, and I felt like I was doing more than a lot of my friends, or what I was shown was the way that a husband is supposed to be. I was like, are you not noticing what I am doing, but only picking out the things that that I missed or didn't do, right? And that's where it just started to be such a drain.
So in finding your authenticness and your ability to speak your truth,
Mm-hmm.
because so many people on this planet can't speak their truth. They want to be accepted. They want to be liked. They want to be understood. But when they don't have the clarity in your life, what was that one moment that got you clarity, Kevin?
Yeah. So just to cut to the chase, the end of my relationship, there was a catalyst, and that was meeting my partner. And she, just meeting her that moment, there was this feeling, and I was like, I don't know what this is, but I know that I've never felt it before. And I never felt it with anyone, within myself. I had no idea what it was, but I knew in that moment that my life had changed. And, for so long, it felt like for so long, I had to prove myself. I was trying to work so hard and be the best husband I can be, and not being so, I guess, for lack of a better term, rewarded for it. So it was like I was trying to do things for expectation and for the love that I wanted and needed, and I never got it. So there was moments where I'd put myself in situations where, I did go outside my marriage, and then would just kill myself for that and say, you know what, the way that I'm being treated, I deserve that because of the mistakes that I made. Right. So, as I kind of continued through that and it was like starting to, look into myself and take care of myself when this happened. But just to get to the point, when I met Kelly and we had this conversation, and I just felt safe and comfortable enough to open up and talk about everything. And by the end of our conversation, we talked for about 7 hours, and she knew everything about me, everything, more than anyone in my life. And I knew more about her than anyone in her life. And I was just like, her story that she shared on your podcast here, a couple weeks ago, I was like, how are you here? And why are you with me? Right. Why are you having this conversation with me? And what is this feeling? And I knew in that moment that things were going to change, and things had changed in my life. And I knew that I had to go back and take care of some things. And that's what she said the same thing. She's like, going forward, she's like, you go back and look after you and look after your marriage, whether that's, get back, stay together and fix it, or, leave and move towards, something with us. I knew that was going to happen. And I just knew in that moment that even if it didn't mean that we were going to be together, what I had felt was something that I had never felt with anyone else before. And I was willing to do whatever I had to do to try and get that feeling again.
Was this partially because of a spiritual awakening you might have had with somebody? Because the fact is sometimes it's a light switch that goes on, and all of a sudden you learn your worthiness, you learn your value. And when you're a people pleaser, you don't know those things. You don't understand those things.
No. And, there was, up until 2012, I lived my life just kind of like being surface level, happy on the outside, but really hollow on the inside. And in 2012, it kind of came to a point, my ex-wife and I lost a son he was stillborn at 5.5 months. And it was in that time where I was like, what's the point? What is this life all about? I'm here just numbing myself, working hard for everybody else, and not really feeling anything. I didn't believe in God or Jesus or the Bible or reincarnation or afterlife or anything. It was just like, you're dead and you're gone. So I was
Mm.
like, what's the point of this life? And,
Right.
she had been seeing this energy healer, like a psychic medium and Reiki practitioner. She'd seen her a few times, and I kept asking these questions, like, what is it like, and who's coming through, and all of these, I really wanted to know, because I was like, it can't be real, right? And she's like, why don't you just go? So I booked an appointment, and I went, and within the first 2 seconds of being there, it just felt really good. But the first thing that she said to me, and she had no idea what had happened, she just said, your son's here and he loves you. And I was just like, oh man,
Right.
that was like, I was different then. Like, that was the moment that changed me. And one of the things that she said to me was like, you know what, Kevin, she's like, the signs that are telling you who you are and what you need to do, and where giving you the path,
Mm-hmm.
and you're not noticing them. They're just about smacking you in the face and you're not noticing them. So she's like, start noticing the signs. So that it was an hour-and-a-half appointment, and there was so many breakthroughs, and it felt like I was like floating out of there. It was so powerful. And that was definitely the start of the spiritual awakening and the journey.
The light switch that had gone on.
Totally. And and I didn't even know what it meant at that point, but as I was leaving there and driving away, I wanted to be better. I just wanted to be a better person overall. And I started to like pick up garbage in the parking lot and put it in the garbage can, or put extra shopping carts away at the grocery store, help people more. And that's who I wanted to be. So that, that kind of kickstarted that a little bit.
Well, I like that. I like that. But with you becoming pretty much a workaholic, just to numb the emotions is very, very common for, a false sense of importance instead of having boundaries.
Yeah.
And have you learned your no yet? When to say no?
It's still a process, boundaries are something that I didn't even, I knew it was a word in vocabulary, but I didn't know what it meant. Right. It was something that saying no for me it was not an option, whether it was right from childhood where, I couldn't say no to my dad, right? There was no such thing, right? My mom couldn't, I couldn't, none of us could. But that was just the way that it was. Right. And, growing up, when I went into the oil patch, there was like, we don't know when our next job's going to come. So don't ever say no. You say yes, no matter what, and we'll just figure it out. And that's how I live my life in business and in personal. And, it just created all of this toxicity and just, more and more headaches.
As you were transitioning from the light switch being turned on, what were some of the fears and the uncertainty of the unknown that hit you the most?
I was told that, so right from the very beginning, there was red flags in my relationship that I ignored. Because of the timeline that I was at, I was 26 years old and I needed to be married and I needed to have a good job and have the house and the car and the kids. And that's, that would make me successful and happy. So when I had this awakening and I was told that this was my soulmate, I was like, oh, really? Man, that, and we were supposed to be together. And it was just like, it was really kind of deflating because I was like, oh, I guess this is the life that I'm supposed to live then. So I'm just going to go on and do that. But I didn't have the understanding of what a soulmate was or what like karmic debt was or a karmic relationship. And that meant we were supposed to be together. We were meant to be, but it wasn't supposed to be, forever on this earth plane. It was supposed to be so that we could learn the lessons that we needed to learn and move forward from that. But I didn't understand that at that time. So that was, that was a big realization for me after our relationship ended. But during it was, I feel like that was a big part of, one of the reasons why I stayed as long as I did.
Well, unfortunately, a lot of times we don't want to be when we're people pleasers, we don't want to upset the apple cart. We don't want to be that person or that bad guy, especially when it's for ourselves.
Totally.
And so with doing that, what were some of the habits that you went through that you hid from everybody and they wouldn't know you?
That one was, the anger that I had, anger and resentment and frustration. And, I was a closet smoker for 16 years.
Wow.
And
I wasn't closet. I was out in the open and I smoked since eight, and I quit in
wow.
my 30s. So it was a long time. And my kids and my husband said, please don't ever try to quit smoking again. We can't live with you. And I was like, I can't live with myself. What are you talking about?
Totally. Yeah. So, that was one of the things that was kind of like, I'm doing this and I'm choosing to do this. So you know what, you don't have to know about it. And I'm choosing this for me. Right. Even though it was an unhealthy habit, but, muttering under my breath, right. Having so much to say, but muttering under my breath because I didn't want to cause that conflict. And, I'd hear, what did you just say? And I'm like, oh, nothing, don't worry about it. Right. And I just bury it. And then I'd go play hockey or play in sports or whatever. And my temper would come out and I'd smash somebody for no reason. And just a nothing game going oh man, this is not me. I'm the nice guy. I want to be liked by everyone, but I have this showing up here. And, it showed up in the relationship with my kids as well. And, if things weren't going, well, or if they were misbehaving or not listening, then I'd get angry and get mad at them too. And it wasn't their fault at all. It was just me burying all of my stuff.
So how have you been working on releasing all of this stuff? What are you doing? Because it is if you can envision a stick of dynamite. And you know how when they're building roads and in oil fields and stuff like that, they'll create a hole and they keep shoving it down, shoving it down, shoving it down, and shoving it down. What are we doing? We're suppressing it. We're pushing it down. And at some point, it's going to erupt. That's physics. That's absolutely physics. So when did you learn that in your life as a man, it was not okay?
Yeah, that it was, I guess, when it was not okay was when it started to show up with my kids. That was the one that I really struggled with because, I was spanked as a kid, but not very often. And, when you do that, you have instant regret. Right. But I'm I was never meant to hurt anybody or whatever, but, I did that. And I wasn't doing it for a form of punishment. It was doing it as to get out something on me. And I maybe put my hand on my kids 2 times in their life, but in that moment I was just oh man, this was on me. So, it was those things there. With my wife, we never did co-parent. So it was always kind of one of those things where, well, I don't like to say always, many times it was, I would say something, the kids would get upset, or I'd be the punisher, and then they would go to her and she would be the soft one. Right. And, I kind of did struggle with that, but, I guess to speak to the biggest change, I would say when I started to take care of myself, when I quit smoking, it'll be 7 years this December. And I knew that the only time that I didn't want to smoke was when I started running. So I started running, and that's when I became more and more clear that, how unhappy I was in my job and how unhappy I was in my relationship, because when I ran, it gave me so much clarity, and, starting to notice more and more of the signs, things started to, really, I could feel it more inside. And I knew there was, this change happening.
I'd like to start talking about your spirituality and with men's work, because I love this about you, because not many men are taking the time to be vulnerable enough to speak their authentic truth and being vulnerable. And so again, this is a very honoring moment, but I'm also grateful that you've come to this point in your life to understand it. because I used to teach women how self-defense, how to protect themselves so they weren't victims.
For sure.
And so I posted something here not too long ago. How about we teach our men not to assault? So if we teach our men not to assault and quit demonizing women, guess what the world can do? So when I find somebody who's a male, and this is not to label you or pick you out of a crowd, it's being able to be in your divine masculine and understand that, you know what? It's okay for a man to cry. It's okay for a man to have feelings. It's okay for a man to say, I don't like this. I don't necessarily think I should be the breadwinner, and to see their partner or their spouse as an equal and not something as something else. And so can we talk about healing the masculine?
Of course. Yeah. Like for me working in the oil and gas industry is very, masculine, toxic masculine. And it's like, just show up and shut up. And if you're hurt or if you're sick or whatever, it doesn't matter. If you don't show up, we're going to replace you. Right. And it's just like, there's no such thing as tears. There's no such thing as emotions. And if there is, you numb them with drugs or alcohol or just working more. Right. Yeah. So with that too, going through, so the catalyst, being my connection with Kelly and changing, I went home and I spent a few days at home, and, that was when I made the decision that I was going to leave my marriage and start, start a new direction. And throughout that time, I never knew who I was. I never shared who I was. I never knew who my true authentic community was, like who really had my back. And I had this kind of this aha moment where I'm like, if I was stuck in a ditch right now, who would I phone and who would actually come? And I couldn't think of anybody. And I was like, oh man, that one's tough. So, I sat down with an old friend of mine at lunch one time, and he said, hey man, he goes, I heard you've had some stuff going on, and how are you doing with that? And for the first time ever, I didn't say, good, thanks, you. I said, you know what, man, I'm not doing very good. I'm struggling. This is what I'm going through. This is how I've felt for a long time. This is who I am. This is who I want to be. And this is it. And he just, yeah. I
was just going to say, how much freedom did you feel at that moment?
Oh man, it felt like I had just taken a vice off of my brain and my shoulders and everything. And it was just like, that release to do that. But then to have another man hold space for me. But then what he said was just so powerful. He goes, me too. And then he shared his, what he was going through, the struggles that he had, the mistakes that he made, the successes. We just held space for each other and openly communicated for like 2.5 hours, and then give each other this massive hug, which we never did. And it was just like that. It was in that moment that I'm like, there needs to be more of these conversations being had, because they're not. And it's visibly impacting our entire world. Right. Like you said, how about the men just stop beating on the ladies and, abusing other people, their kids, their families, their whatever. That starts because they don't have a safe space to, openly talk about who they are, what they want, what they're feeling, like all of that.
Well, I love that. But see, here's the thing is with my husband and I both being in law enforcement, that was quite a dichotomy to begin with. And I was so independent. I didn't know how to be dependent on anybody else because of my upbringing. And a lot of times in our societies and our cultures and our traditions, the man is the power, the woman is to do this, this, and this. And so that demonization that's been going on for 26,000 years or more, all of a sudden you go from, oh, this is a man's job. This is a man's job. This is a man's job. And as a woman, I go into a man's field at a time there's not many women in it. And it's like, oh, there's excuses. Oh, you want to see this. Oh, you want to do that. Oh, and it's all perverted and it's all demented. And it's like, no, I want to solve injustices.
Totally.
I want to make sure that people have a voice,
Mm-hmm.
that if they're victimized, that their perpetrators are held accountable. When my brother was murdered by a drunk driver is the catalyst that got me involved in law enforcement. His family helped cover this up. And it wasn't one person. He killed one and injured two.
Wow.
And so the fact is that was a catalyst for me to make that decision. And that's what took my life forward. But when I was 22 years of age, I had uterine cancer.
Mm.
And I had surgery. They took out part of the uterus and I was out and I got cleared to come back to work. And I was a dispatcher at a police department. And my supervisor, the lieutenant at the time, the assistant chief, comes in and says, "Well, Chris, I just heard from your doctor, and he said it took 3 extra stitches to close the wool sac." And I'm like, "What? Excuse me?" So in his implication, he was trying to say that because I was a single female, that I was promiscuous. Even though I was the furthest thing from promiscuous. You don't deal with cancer. And the issue is they don't do the surgery as soon as they find out about it. There was a process of going through things. And I wasn't, but it was the fact that he was implicating it. And that child, that 8-year-old hurt child in me came out. So I said, "Could you do me a favor? Can you sit here for a minute?" And when I got him into the chair behind the radio, I picked my stuff up and I said, "I quit." Wow. And all of a sudden he panicked. But he had no problem saying it. He had no problem thinking this was a funny, instead of understanding I was having major issues with dealing with my cultures, my traditions, and now my value and my worth as a woman.
Of course.
But if we can teach people to see people as people, regardless of their gender, and that is also a mission of mine.
Mm-hmm.
So when you have self-respect and you have boundaries, you teach people how to treat you. And I think with you doing this and opening up and talking about it from a man's point of view is going to be that step forward for men to know they have a safe place.
Absolutely.
And the one thing that I always told my husband, because I was in law enforcement before he was no matter what happens, you have to talk to me.
Mm-hmm.
The biggest divider, especially in any kind of high pressure job, is a critical incident happening and you not wanting to share it with your wife because you don't want to put them through the experience. You don't want them to understand it. I already had an understanding. I already knew things. I had already been experienced to certain many different things. So the fact was, when you have somebody kill themselves in your ear on a phone and you're trying to get rescue or law enforcement there fast enough, it does something to your psyche. So the fact is, but being able to communicate it is key.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I see how your freedoms came to you. I see how you were uplifted. I see how it helped take what was shoved down and pushed down in you to explode. But I honor you because you're taking a positive look at it and turning all that negative into a positive. Can we talk about, are you, how are you helping men deal with being toxic?
Well, the toxic masculinity and that's kind of a general term, and what it talks to, like the boys don't cry, like, get up and go to work, be tough, walk it off, suck it up. Like that's that toxic masculinity where it's like, emotions and feelings and words aren't expressed because they don't want to be heard, is what we've been told. Right. And this goes for men, this is kind of like a generalization for men, but it's society as a whole. Right. Yes. But, it's been a struggle for men for the longest time because of that gender, that gender role that has been put upon us. Right. So, what I speak to is no matter what your situation, your feelings are valid and emotions are valid. And, for me, the longest time I didn't want to speak up because I had a pretty blessed childhood. My parents stayed together. At Christmas time, I asked for something from Santa Claus and I got it. My childhood was very blessed. So what my childhood trauma looks like on the outside, it didn't, to me, was like, I'm not going to say anything because, Chris's is way more tragic than mine, or Kelly's is way more tragic than mine. So I'm just going to keep mine buried. And that's so oftentimes I feel like we just don't want to say anything because we don't feel like our feelings or our emotions or what we've been through is valid enough to warrant it. And it's a lie, and it's a limited belief, because no matter what you're feeling, you deserve that. I wouldn't say deserve to feel that way, but you deserve to be able to express that and honor that as that's how you feel, because your story is your story, but the emotions are for real. Whether, I give an example to a client the other day. I'm like, you know what? Your worst trauma could be that your dad showed up for an ice cream cone for your sister, and you didn't get one, and you felt completely abandoned. But then someone else could have lost their parents and they feel completely abandoned. But that's all that you know.
Right? It is absolutely perception. And the thing is who's to say what degree of perception that causes the pain or the trauma? And so I think that's so important. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter what you do. I'm one of 11 children. And all of us, even the 6 of us that were out at the orphanage, my mother had 1 more who was home. My dad had 4 more, and they all dealt with different traumas on different levels.
Absolutely.
But it doesn't make it so those traumas are invalid, or it isn't your core or perception of what life experiences are. It's how we step out of it and not let our past define us.
That's right. And to, not sit in your own shit, so to speak. Right. And that's one thing, that's a saying that I like too, is you can sit in it and honor it, but don't get stuck in it. Right. That's not your identity. That's not who you are. Yeah, it hurts. And yeah, it's shaped certain parts of my life, or, of anyone's life, but it doesn't mean that has to be your reality. The thing that I've, with this toxic masculinity too, is like, why aren't you saying what you need to say, or talking about the things that you need, that are really bothering you, and continuing to just go down this path of whether it's people pleasing, or just working, or, just this life of, getting to a level, and, that's what's supposed to be happy, but it's not. Is, that just getting to that point it doesn't have to be that way. And there is a better way. And the journey to where your authentic self is not this way. It's this way.
Yes.
Right.
Yes, I agree. But men and women aren't taught that.
No, none of us are. And that's the thing too. And, whether it's men, I speak specifically to, not specifically, but the majority to men, because that's where I came from. That's the background that I came from. But, as you said, Chris, too, you were in a very masculine environment, leading a very masculine, you had to be that masculine role. That's no different, whether you're a man or woman. Your thoughts, your feelings, your emotions are all the same. And that's so.
But being in the divine masculine most of my life, and being that tomboy, I didn't allow myself, because men didn't have emotions. I couldn't have emotions, because in that world, it was like, oh, here we go. She just wants to get her own way, or here she goes, she's trying to play, to get more out of it, instead of it actually being a true trauma or pain. So I learned how not to complain, how not to speak up, how not to not even upset the apple cart. It was just nobody would listen.
Yeah, 100%.
So it happens to both. But the fact is unless you have walked in the shoes in a masculine career field, and I mean more than 5 or 10 years, you start seeing things from a different perspective. And it's okay to be harmonized with your divine masculine and harmonized with your divine feminine, as long as it's harmonized. But
Mm-hmm.
when one takes over more control, that's where the confusion comes from.
Totally. And that makes total sense. Yeah. And
So I
yeah,
love talking to you about this. Are you writing a book?
not yet, but actually that same healer that I went to, she's like, you know what? I have a vision of you sitting at a desk with a candle writing your book by hand. And I'm like, so what am I going to write about? Like people aren't going to listen to what I have to say, right? And she's like, you have a lot. You have a lot that people will want to read. So I was like, huh, interesting. So yeah, I've thought about it, and yeah, it just hasn't started yet.
The reason being, and the reason why it's resonating with me, is because that voice, that word, that understanding. If more men share, if I share it, oh, you're just being a woman, you just don't like, being told what to do, whatever. But coming from a man to men,
Mm-hmm.
it's like, oh wow, he's speaking what I couldn't say. It's just like my childhood hero was Muhammad Ali.
Mm.
And at that time, he was speaking when I couldn't have a voice. He was challenging. He was standing in his power where I couldn't stand in mine.
Mm.
And I had, fortunately, in my life, being a childhood hero of mine, I was able to work with him when he came into town and did his security at a mall for him for 7 days.
Wow, that's
Actually,
amazing.
I actually have a picture. I don't know if you can see this.
Oh wow, that's amazing.
And I said to him, I said, you have been my hero since I was 8. And he said, I knew that and I love you for it. Because most people, and it wasn't about color, he said, most people see me as something different. I said, no, I see you as standing in your authenticity, because many of the men deserted this country and went to other places so they weren't held accountable. You stood your ground.
Mm-hmm.
You took the consequences and said, this is not my war. This is not my issue. And if more men would have done that, we could have had a difference on sending people over to Vietnam.
Mm-hmm. And we're seeing that a lot now with the division and everything that's going on in our world. So that it's interesting that comes up right now too. And the following the trend is so not wanting to stand out, and as a people pleaser, I wanted to stand out, but I'm like, I still needed to be liked at the same time. So, there was moments of it, but yeah, it's like, I was so afraid of being judged or talked about. And I feel like that's what so many of us base our decisions, our lives, our direction on, what society says or what others think that we should do.
Or even like society norms, because back in my day, women and men weren't supposed to be divorced. It was unheard of. You were just supposed to take it, stay in a bad relationship, and just be there. And so when my parents decided to get a divorce in 1966 and walk away, that it was like, oh, and it just didn't happen overnight. It was finally my dad put in a transfer and didn't tell anybody and just moved.
Wow.
And then my mother was like, she goes out to the base and says, hey, I'm looking for my husband. They said, well, he's not stationed here. He put in for a transfer. And so then she went to the Catholic Church, and the Catholic Church says, 1967, you can't raise 6 kids by yourself. You can't do that. We'll help you.
Wow.
So it's society norms too. But right now, we have no morals, we have no integrity, we have no accountability or responsibility for ourselves. And when we lose that for ourselves, we lose it for a community, we lose it for a state, a territory, a country, a planet.
Well, and, I was married too, and it was almost like that certificate just was a license to say you could treat each other however you wanted, and it didn't matter, right?
It's true.
You just had to be together forever. So, you could take a month off or a year off or whatever and be a complete piece of shit to the other person, and they couldn't leave anyways because the certificate said you had to, and you made these promises. What if we could actually speak our truth to each other and be like, you know what? we're not serving each other. We're on different paths. I love you still, but I'm going this way and you're going this way. And you know what? That's okay.
Yes.
Right. Without having the government say this is wrong, or the churches say this is wrong, or society be like, this is wrong. What you guys are doing is wrong because you're not doing it the way that it was supposed to look like this forever.
Right.
So, with Kelly and I, that's exactly how we are living our life. And it's, our decision and our sacred union is based on loving each other unconditionally for who we are in that moment, and continuing to wake up and choose each other every single day. And if that means 5 years down the road, 6 months down the road, 10 years down the road, whatever that is, if we're going in a different direction, maybe we need to do that and honor each other for that so that we can come back together better. Right.
Or let's think about it this way. If we communicate every day authentically, real, rare, and raw, you're not going to have those moments, because the communication is going to be open. It's going to be safe. It's going to be sound, and it's going to be authentic.
That's exactly it. And it's, having the conversations, especially when they're hard, because a lot of times they are, and they get avoided. I know for me, they did. So, we actually have 2 date nights a week, on Mondays and Fridays, and Mondays are the hard days. We talk about, finances. We talk about kids. We talk about our struggles. We talk about, things that are the hard part, where I'm not showing up for her, where she's not showing up for me. And we hold space for that. And it can be triggering, but we know that that's coming, and we know that that's going to happen. And then on our second date night on Fridays is all about filling each other's cups up.
Sure.
And it's like, doing things that talking about our dreams, talking about our goals, supporting each other's needs, and, loving on each other, and, connecting with the people that we want to connect with. That's what it's all about. And it doesn't have to be lavish. Most times it's only for an hour, right? We both have our businesses and kids and all the outside stuff too. But for that hour, we're completely 100% present to what we're there to be present for. And that's each other, and continuing to show up for each other, but ourselves first. And that's the best way that we can show up for each other.
It is. It absolutely is. And being present in your moment instead of always looking behind you or so far in the future that it's not here. But the best thing that I'm hearing and I'm feeling is you're not listening to the inner chatter that we bring up in ourselves because of our fears, because of our uncertainties from our past experiences, and speaking a truth.
Totally. And, for me, I wouldn't say for me it's harder than her. I would say that she's better at it than I am, not allowing that chatter. I get very mental body and stuck in my head still. And that's something that I really work on. I do a lot of meditation, for that heart and mind coherence, because I have a hard time hearing what my heart's saying and what it's guiding me to do, because my head gets so loud.
Well, I get that, but that's not a male thing. That's a human thing. A lot of people do that. It's not just to the male, the male entities. The thing is what I teach my clients is how to harmonize the masculine, which is the mind, and the feminine, which is the heart. And there's actually something you can do to make your brain a whole brain and not left-sided or right-sided. It is your brain and acts as an entity instead of against each other.
Absolutely.
And so as you work in harmony with each other, and it's not about balancing, because that's a leveraging. You don't want to balance anything. You want to harmonize everything.
That's right. Yeah.
So I love the fact that this is what you're teaching your clients, and your avatar is mostly men, correct?
That's right. And it's men that were me. A few years ago, the guys that had low self-worth and the people pleasers and lost their identities in their jobs and in their relationships and didn't know where, they began and their work life, ended, or, how it was so enmeshed that they didn't really even know who they were.
Right. And that's very common for all human beings because
100%.
everybody doesn't, nobody wants their name slandered. Nobody wants any gossip because we know how, people don't take that pause and they don't say, well, gosh, I'm hearing this, but is it true? What did it really happen? Maybe I shouldn't speak of it. And that's where you become authentic in yourself and you end the gossip. Where as a facility duty officer, if someone came and told me gossip, I'd turn to them and I'd say, shame on you. You don't even know if this is true, but you're passing this around. And now this is everybody's perception of this individual. And you don't even know if it's true. What if I said that about you?
Totally. That's 100%.
And that's society. That's where we are society. I still don't get cancel culture. How do you cancel a human being? I'm just asking. I'm old school. It's like, you don't like me? Okay, I'm okay with that. That's on you. That's not on me. And I love the fact that you're being able to say, hey, that's not me. That's on you. And that's
right.
yours to have. And that's an expansion.
100%. One of the things that comes through when you say that is like, why is it that you want to cancel me just because of what I say or what I believe? It's something within you that's an issue or a belief or a fear, right? So yeah, it's I talk to my kids about this all the time too. They'll come here and they'll talk about what happens at the other home or at school or about their friends and I'm like, okay, just hang on a second. I said, are you going to have this conversation with these people face to face? Because if not, then you don't get to talk about them behind your back. Because we ask them all the time, what are some boundaries? So we have house boundaries for each one of us have our own house boundaries. And one of them for both of them is they don't want us to talk about them behind their back. So that's a boundary. Right. And, we hold that up for them too. And sometimes they don't like that.
Well, of course you don't, because it's easier to point a finger at somebody else to realize you have 3 fingers pointing back at you to say that, or even 4, if your thumb is one of those kinds of bend backwards, that there's 4 things I should be doing in me. And usually when I point a finger at somebody else, am I reflecting what's inside of me? And if you ask yourself those simple questions, it doesn't have to be complicated. But if I'm mentoring somebody and I ask them the hard questions and they start getting disruptive and getting angry and walking away and hanging up phones, it's because they don't want to face the truth. And that's where a lot of people are. They don't want to face the truth that they've allowed to compromise themselves, or they've allowed themselves to be put in such a position that they're just existing. They're not even thriving. They're just existing.
Totally. That's right.
So I absolutely love this. So what is the name of your group? I've got the Safe Zone for Men was born, which transitioned to the Warriors of the Heart.
That's right. Yeah.
And the Warriors of Coaching. Yeah.
So my coaching, I call myself a conscious masculine mentor. And, coaching for me hasn't really resonated as much. I believe the mentorship and men need mentors. And I actually heard this on another podcast too. And, they haven't had conscious masculine mentors where it's like, you know what, we can be the warrior or the king or the embodied leader, masculine when we are called to, but we can also be that soft side of the lover and, hold space for each other and hug on each other and cry together. And be that supporter and, nurture as men, right? But also be that fierce warrior and standing up and being the leader and the embodied king when we're called to. So that's, I did a reading with Kelly, actually, a Akashic Records reading. And one thing that came through, she goes, I feel like you're a warrior of the heart. And I'm like, yes, that feels amazing. And I said, I'm going to change my group to that and call that my coaching, my mentorship business as well. So yeah, it's Warrior of the Heart Consulting. And my men's group is called Warriors of the Heart.
See, I love that. But from my audience, I want everybody to know that no matter what sex you are, you have the divine masculine and you have the divine feminine in everybody. So again, if you can harmonize them, it's not just a female, because every cell starts out as a XX. It's later as it is fertilized that it decides whether it's going to be an XX or an XY. But every cell in the universe starts out as XX. And most people forget that. But I love the fact that we are now in the Aquarian Age. As of yesterday, during the equinox, we finally went in. It took 26,000 years for Pluto and Saturn to come together.
Wow.
And in that time was 26,000 years ago was 1526, when Mark was leaving the Catholic Church because he didn't like, he was the Pope, and he left the Catholic Church because he didn't like the ways that it was going. He had enough courage to walk away because they were demonizing women and blaming women. And that's when the Piscean Age started. So we just ended. You didn't know that?
No. And that's amazing.
Yeah. And so now we're going into the Aquarian Age, and we're there now. But what it is it's not about the divine feminine. It's about humanity. It is about everybody being equal. It's going to take a little bit to get through society, but we're going to be in this age for the next 10, 15 years. So we have the ability now to say, hey, I didn't like back then when I was being labeled as a juvenile delinquent because my parents abandoned me. I had enough to deal with another label just because society decided to label me as that. And the best way to do that is not let your past define you. Because if you do, then you become a product of your society. 100%. And many of my siblings have. But if you define yourself and say, hey, wait a minute, this is what happened, that it was in this pain and in this trauma, and I'm going to use this as my bearings. So if this doesn't resonate with me, I'm not going to go straight. I'm going to take a left or right. I don't know where it's going to take me, but I know I'm not going straight because that's where the pain came from.
For sure.
And so if we could spread that message like you're doing now with men, I have for the last 3 years have my intention for the planet has been what's done in the dark, let it come to light. And so it wasn't about gender, it wasn't about race, it was about what's being done in the dark by entities and greed and, different individuals trying to strategize against other people. Let it come surface. Let's find out about this so that we know what to prevent. Because if we don't, we're going to have what our past is going to come back. And that's why I love history. And most people don't realize that in the Spanish War, the first case of the Spanish flu, which was called H1N1, sound familiar?
Right? Exactly.
H1N1 came from a cook in Kansas on an army post.
Wow.
And he was cooking for all the soldiers and cooking and cutting potatoes and spreading it. So where did we send our soldiers? We sent them over to World War I. They used H1N1 in mustard gas to make it more effective. So it's a biological warfare is what was going down. And every flu since then, if you do your research, it is a derivative or a mutated version of that H1N1. And what do we have now? H1N1-2?
Something like that, yeah.
So follow the money, folks. I always say follow the money, because who's ever getting the patents for these is the ones who mutated it or helped get it mutated.
That's right.
Because there's gazillions of dollars in a patent, even for an antidote.
No, I believe it. And we're seeing it. We're seeing it now, right?
We're living it. But there's so many people that want to close their eyes and say, this is what it has to be. This is what it is. But when money gets involved, it gets twisted.
Yeah.
But that's the Piscean Age.
Totally. And something with that too is labeling it or making your decisions based on, even if you choose to take the hardest route because that's what right? And that's what so many of us is like, you find that like that coast zone where you're like, get to the next level and just kind of like coast through your life because that's comfortable, right?
Mhm.
It happens so far too often.
And it's unfortunate because when we become comfortable, what do? We let our defenses down, and then we're susceptible to everything and anything that comes in our world.
100%.
So I love that. Kevin, it has been my honor and my pleasure to have you here today. Thank you so much. And I love your perspective from the man's point of view.
Thank you, Chris.
Hang on one second. It takes a special kind of individual to dream their dreams, their thoughts, and turn it into their reality. Kevin has done just that. He stepped past his fears, stayed the course, and had the courage to follow through the end. Kevin, you've championed yourself, and we know who you've become. Thank you for sharing your ideas, your thoughts, and your dreams with us today.